Hey, friends. Well, my headaches have really plagued me through Thanksgiving break and set me behind. That's my excuse. But here I am. I want to talk through the two chapters from, there's Marjorie right there, of The Fall to Violence that are the signed chapters during break, so that when we get back together on Monday, we just jump right into the assigned reading for Monday. There's some things I just want to highlight. I'll do this first chapter, of course, or chapter 2, Rebellion Against Creation, where she talks about the rather, let's say, revolutionary trend that occurred in the development of feminist theology in the later part of the 20th century. A woman named Judith Plaskow was probably the most important in this. She mentions Plaskow in some footnotes, and maybe even in the text itself. Yeah, Valerie Saving as well. Yeah, so their important pieces are footnoted on the bottom of page 31. You see the dates. Wow, 1960. 1982, 1980. And the basic critique is this, that the dominant Christian understanding of sin has been generally reduced to pride, that pride is the essential, the pride of rebellion against God, the pride of refusal to acknowledge God as the not only creator, but we'll say one who sets the limits on human behaviors and what God expects of human beings. And when we rebel against this, we're rebelling out of pride. This goes certainly back to St. Augustine. You have it significantly in Luther, I think, as well. But more recently, in the 20th century, I guess we'll call him a theologian, Reinhold Niebuhr, and she's, of course, really addressing herself primarily to Niebuhr, whose work was very important in the 20th century, still remains so. But on page 32, just a little after the middle of the first full paragraph, the feminist scholars see the sin of pride as describing the sins of the powerful who refuse to recognize the rightful boundaries of others, and the sin of hiding as the refusal of the responsibility to become a self that is so often the plight of women and of men who are not in positions of power. To put it simply, to sort of frame sin in its most essential form as pride is the labor of people who can afford to be proud, who have power, and who know the tempting possibilities of power. So down in the next paragraph, the feminists, writing from the perspective of the marginalized, find the problem of sin rooted in the great challenge of becoming oneself. Their point of reference is not a command of God which one defiantly violates, but the demeaning demands of social custom which one feels feels powerless to violate. Yeah, so for the oppressed, the problem is not defining limits, but defying limits. Not defining limits that God has imposed, but defying the limits that culture, society has imposed. The heteronormative culture. So that's a real basic, and I'm happy that in this class and nowhere else we've been able to address that pretty briefly. Part of what that the bigger point would be, sort of with any doctrine, you could almost say it all depends. It all depends on who's doing the formulating, where and when they're doing the formulating of this doctrine. To what ends, and how often are doctrines formulated as much out of, in fact, sinful pride as or yeah, as anything else. Well, so she wants to talk in this more fundamental way about the self as a socially constructed reality, very dynamic and fluid. Obviously, this is where her process philosophy and theology will begin to enter into the picture, and if it hasn't already. And I like what she's doing here, and I want to try to show you why or tell you why. But again, if you think of sin as pride, and you can think of like somebody, lifting their fist up to God and saying, no, and I'm going to be my own God, that kind of thing. Again, she says, for many human beings, certainly, especially among women, but not exclusively women, but people who have been oppressed, marginalized, and not considered, real selves. For them, the temptation is to submit to that, to find a place of relative security, perhaps in that, and never venture out beyond those imposed limits to explore the possibilities of what Suchocki calls often here self-transcendence. Now, I want to go to page 34 now, top paragraph. Really good stuff. This is process philosophy. Transcendence, that is otherness, we'll say, in nature, is relative. It is the conditioning transcendence of finitude. You're finite, I'm finite. My breakfast drink, of course. And the cup in which it is, all finite. But each entity in nature transcends all others simply through the uniqueness of its own identity. So this cup transcends, that is, marks itself as different from everything else in the world in which we find it. But this mode of transcendence is gained not through isolation from all others, but through relation to all others. What an entity is depends on where it is, when it is, and how it responds to the various influences upon it, whether those influences be primarily the atoms and molecules that are the building blocks of the visible and invisible universe, or whether those influences are the social influences of culture and family. So part of the idea here is to try to construe or offer a portrait of reality that is deeply, deeply interrelational, interdependent, and thus always changing, because in fact relationships are by their very nature dynamic. They cannot be static. There has to be this sort of sense of movement and change. Such a mode of transcendence is extraordinarily ordinary. Extraordinarily ordinary. It's happening all the time, qualifying every existent reality. I'm sitting in this room right now. As I speak this, of course, you'll be sitting someplace else when you watch it. But who I am at this moment, part of the idea here is that right here, as I'm giving this little mini lecture here, everything about that's flowed into who I am, personal relationships, impersonal relationships, culture, family, significant events, traumas, every moment, even the most mundane and forgettable, have in fact flowed into this moment of my being, which is always a becoming, because that flowing is always occurring. One of the great ancient philosophical statements of process was by the Greek philosopher Heraclitus, who said you cannot step into the same river twice. I've always liked that. Just to quickly analyze it, obviously you stick your toe in the river pull it out and stick it back in, and Heraclitus is first of all saying that river isn't the same, and it's obvious, right? That's an easy one because rivers are flowing and dynamic and to do so. You can't step into the same river twice, but not only because of the dynamism of the river, but because you aren't the same you anymore. You're at least a you that has now stuck your toe into that water, or that your foot into that water. So you've experienced its temperature, its movement, the feel of the water upon your foot has now become, one more, we'll say small, but nonetheless real element in your life that itself has changed you. We could talk even more, just about the fact that the human body is always changing and so on. But if we just keep it at the most obvious level, the river isn't the same. You're not the same. Not only have you grown older, but in that intervening time, again, you've had that experience, so that now if you're to stick your foot in that river yet again, it won't be the same experience, because now you have memory, expectations of what the first time was like, etc. You cannot step into the same river twice. What then? I'm going to go down to the bottom of 35. Last full paragraph. What then of transcendence? If infinity permeates nature, then the human capacity for the infinite does not place us outside of nature. In other words, she's just saying that once you begin to think about all these causal events and flow that move you into this moment, and then think about that it's not just you, it's everything everywhere throughout the universe, or even multiverse, whatever we have. And this is pretty huge. Maybe it's not infinite, but it certainly is practically infinite. And so she's trying to say the notion that sin had to be pride against that which was considered to be the infinite, that is God above, can really just as well be framed in terms of the world around us in its immensity and its complexity and its dizzyingly, I need more coffee, beautiful entanglements. I'll stop there for now.